All right. So since the pyramid video was pretty well received, I thought I'd do another one on some really interesting topic about ancient technology. Pretty much from now until October, when I'll be in the States, I'm gonna keep reminding you to help out Nameless Bear, because what Nameless Bear has done is very selflessly. He's already committed himself to paying for my flights and hotel and everything. And he's also readjusted the GoFundMe, so as he gets the prices locked down, he's only asking to get the costs back. So since he's paying it forward, I hope you guys will help him out and make sure he doesn't get left out of pocket either. Throw a couple of bucks. It doesn't matter if it's just $2 or whatever. I believe he's also booked the location for a book signing event at a bookshop in Hobart, which is right next door to the theater where Owen will be doing his thing. And there's only space there for about 30-40 people. So if you're gonna come and you're sending money, leave your name and just say that you're coming and whatever, because obviously we don't know how many people are gonna show up, but those people who did contribute some money and left their name will obviously have precedence if we run out of space. There's only a space for 30-40 people there at the book signing, but I believe we can hire the place for 2 or 3 hours. So if we recognize that there's going to be a lot of people, maybe we'll just do 3 sessions of an hour each. If there isn't as many people, maybe we can do the whole 2 hours or so, or whatever, on whatever topics you guys will decide there and then, or what I come prepared for. So just a little bit of book housekeeping on that. I'll probably mention it at the beginning of each video from now on if something changes and so on. There may be t-shirts available there. I think Nameless Bear might have designed a shirt just for the event. I'm not sure. He sent me some pictures, but we're both busy and so on. Anyway, that's that. Now, about ancient radios. There is actually a more complete blog post on this that I did years ago, and so I'll put the link after, below the GoFundMe notes on the video notes. I'll put the link to the blog post which discusses this in more details. But basically, if I remember right, it's a German guy called Dr. Konstantin Mail, and he is a teacher at the University of Applied Science in Furtwangen, if I'm pronouncing that right. And this guy is not some crazy guy with some weird theory. He is a pretty solid professor. He's an engineer and a doctor, and he has built devices that transmit energy without wires. So in other words, he's somewhat repeated the Tesla giant tower that he wanted to build that would provide electricity without any wires, wirelessly. He's done little versions of that, and if I recall right, there's a video somewhere about the guy. I may have some links to it in the blog post. I don't remember. I wrote it a while back, but anyway, if the link doesn't work or you're on your mobile or whatever, if you just go to gfilotto.com, so it's the first initial of my name, then my surname.com, and there's a search function on my blog, so you just go search ancient radios and it'll come up. So what this guy has theorized is that the ancient temples of ancient Greece and Rome and so on were actually low frequency, low power radios that could transmit information. And he reckons that this was possible because back in ancient days, the background cosmic radiation, the interference from that was, relatively low because we didn't have all the wireless radio crap that we've got going in there right now. And if the frequency of these, well, first let me backtrack a bit. In order to create these ancient radios, instead of an antenna you could create a tuned cavity. So a tuned cavity will work as an antenna for a radio, and it would use only very little power. And the bigger this tuned cavity is, the lower the power that you'd have to use. Now there's a calculation which is on the blog, which is basically like the length of the wave. I can't remember if it's divided or multiplied by the speed of light, will give you the frequency and blah blah blah. And what this guy predicted is that the frequencies would be that these temples could transmit information at was somewhere in the region between, I think, 3 and 10 hertz, if I remember right. Now, as it happens, after I'd read this, I went to Greece. My second ex-wife had got me a trip to Greece for my 40th birthday, I think, if I remember right. And so we went to Athens, and then we went to Delphi. And in Delphi, there's still a pretty gigantic ruins of a temple to Apollo, which is in the blog post. There's a photograph I took of it. And I measured the dimensions of this temple, because you can use the formula that the good Dr. Mayl, if I hope I'm pronouncing his name correct, M-E-Y-L, he provided this basic formula to figure out, what the frequency of the tuned cavity or of the temple would be. And as it happens, now he didn't pick Apollo, I did. I picked the Apollo temple, and it turns out it's smack in the middle of his prediction. It's about 6 hertz. Now, the additional important thing is, if you were to send only a pulsed message at specific intervals, in other words, if the guys on the other temple know that, come 4 o'clock, that's when the message gets sent, and it just gets sent kind of like in a Morse code type thing or something like that, it would require even less power. So that this starts to make it really probable and viable. And again, just to give you an idea what this guy is like, he's written a book about... well, let me just read you the title of his book. It's called Scalar Waves, From an Extended Vortex and Field Theory to a Technical, Biological and Historical Use of Longitudinal Waves. I think you can tell it's a catchy title that clearly tells you it's going to be an easy read. So the thing is, he does get into the physics into his book. It's about a 630 plus page book. So, like I said, not light bed reading, but interesting. Now, this is going to sound sort of crazy, but he also reckons that one of the ways that they could transmit information was into the guts of animals, which is why he reckons there were so many sacrifices in the temples. And we do know that the Romans and the Greeks used to, kill animals and look into their viscera, or their guts for the vernacular, to try and predict the future. Now, he reckons that there is a way that these pulsed radio waves affected the biology of the living creatures that were put on the altar. Sounds a bit crazy, not crazy at all, because there's a lot more weird stuff that's happened with a guy called Peter Garayev, which I talk a bit about on the blog post there as well. Now, when I first wrote this blog post, I think I had some incorrect information about Peter Garayev, and I spoke to him after that, and I forgot to update the blog post. Now, in the blog post, I say that that Peter Garayev's work, they changed a salamander embryo to a frog embryo, or vice versa. But when I spoke to, via translator to Peter Garayev himself, years later when I wrote the Systema book, I checked on whether, these things were true, and he said, no, we didn't do that. But we did regrow teeth, and, he's done stuff that is almost as incredible as the salamander into a frog or vice versa. They did sort of rehabilitate seeds that had been irradiated at Chernobyl that were basically dead. And what they did is they read with the laser interferometry the DNA of living seeds and kind of projected that onto the dead seeds, and the dead seeds became viable and would grow, which they weren't doing before. So a really interesting guy. But you're saying, well, it's all just a nice theory. Well, no. This guy's got a lot of evidence, which in fact the Romans transmitted, and there is a lot of pretty solid documented evidence that in many cases the Romans transmitted or information. In other words, one location in the Roman Empire knew about events that happened in that area. They knew it across the empire, like hundreds of kilometers away, somewhere very far away. In another part of the empire, they became aware of something that happened very far from them very quickly. Quicker than you can have runners, quicker than you can have messengers, even if you have, marathon running guys in a trail, so that one guy runs until he's tired, to the next post, to the next post, to the next post. Even with that sort of Pony Express type runners or messengers, it still doesn't account for how the same event was discussed in different documents that were written in different locations in a very short space of time. In fact, there are enough examples of this that some people have suggested that the Romans had the wrong sense of time, or didn't know how to measure time properly, because they couldn't have possibly known that information at the same time with such speed. I think it's a very reasonable theory, and furthermore it makes sense because each one of the temples, depending on which god it was dedicated to, had different dimensions, and these dimensions were very precise. They were very particular. You had bigger temples and smaller temples, but they always tended to have the same proportions, which is very interesting because this Dr. Mael reckons that each god had a different frequency, so that they wouldn't interfere, and you would perhaps use different temples for different types of messages, or possibly at different times. It's a very interesting theory, and it makes a lot of sense. It also makes a lot of sense that it would have been kept very, very quiet, because if the Romans had such technology, the last thing they want to do is let their enemy know about it. They would have a serious advantage on their enemy. Just imagine if you could transmit by radio frequency information about troop movements or a war that's going on or something like that, in minutes or hours, where instead of days, just on that alone, on troop movements alone, you would wipe out your enemy with, you would be able to position your forces in such a much more strategically powerful position. The enemy wouldn't even expect an attack from you, because they might not even know what happened, a couple hundred meters from then. So they would still be acting on the oldest information they had, and your guys are like 2 days ahead of them information-wise. It's a huge advantage. So it makes perfect sense that we wouldn't know about it, that we wouldn't have documented evidence of this having been done, especially if it was successful, and it kept being successful. And the Romans were very good at keeping things quiet. Keep in mind that one of the reasons that we know that Jesus rose from the dead was because if the Romans fell asleep, if a sentry fell asleep while on duty, they would be put to death. They had very strict rules about protecting the empire from enemies. Very strict. The average Roman soldier was really not that different from the average samurai. It was common for a Roman soldier who had been dishonored to throw himself on his sword. It was also common for a Roman soldier that had been disrespected to kill everybody involved even if it meant his own death, and even if it meant taking his life by his own hand. So, you know, they had pretty good ways to ensure that the secrets would not be spread. Also because it would be, who would know about it would essentially be the temple guardians, you know, the so-called priests, the hierarchy of heroes, the priests, you know, the people who looked after the temple and who did the sacrifices and so on. They would be the people that would know, and perhaps only a few of them, in fact. So it's a very interesting theory, and I just want to share with you. I think that Dr. Mayall's book is really interesting. So there is a guy that made some comments. I didn't reply to him. He made about 3 comments on the pyramid one. It's got a double barrel name, and he actually made some reasonable comments about piezoelectric effects and scalar technology and so on. Most people that read his comments probably thought he was crazy, but I didn't think he was. The guy who left the comments on the pyramid video, I think he would probably be one of the few people who might enjoy Dr. Mayall's book with the catchy title. I'll just read it again because I think it just sort of rolls off the tongue. Scalar Waves, from an extended vortex and field theory to a technical, biological and historical use of longitudinal waves. It's brilliant. And I just also want to point out that it's very interesting how he refers to how this technology would affect living creatures, as in they sacrificed animals. Because there was another German guy whose name escapes me. I think it was Barnhart. I think that was his surname. He was operating around the Nazi era, and he created the air fuel bomb. That was one of his inventions. Early on in his career, when he was, I think, 19, he kind of blew himself up on a bomb that went wrong, an experiment that went wrong, and he blew off kind of his hands, and he was blind and half deaf or mostly deaf, something like that. Nevertheless, he carried on doing his work, and Joseph Farrell has the theory that this guy possibly had invented technology that was used on the Eastern Front against the Russians, because the Nazis basically wiped out something like, I don't know, some ridiculous number of people, like millions of soldiers in like months. And, you know, just on bullets alone, it would be difficult. So Joseph Farrell reckons that they may have used mini nukes or fuel air bombs or stuff like that to do it. And anyway, this Barnhart guy, if that's his name, or Burkhardt, something like that, he's the only guy that I am aware of that came up with a theory of physics that included consciousness and biological effects, which to me sounds like a much more complete theory. There is also a Russian guy whose name I forget, but is a brilliant guy. Ah, damn it, I'm horrible with names, I'm sorry. Who did an experiment which was basically something like a dunking of huge, I can't remember if it was steel blocks or something, in like liquid at different times of the year, and noticing that there was a difference in the time and the expansion of the blocks and so on. It was kind of complicated, as is Peter Garayev's stuff, and as is this Dr. Konstantin Mayall's. It's right at the edge of my ability to follow, because I am pretty conversant in physics and pretty esoteric physics as well, but the stuff gets pretty deep, and the maths, I don't have the maths to do it. My maths is relatively, it's good, but it's relatively basic when you're talking about this sort of thing. And the reason I mention all these things is because another one of the commenters asked about alchemy, and I do believe that alchemy definitely had some uses. There is information, I think, that was lost as far as alchemical things working or happening or being used. I'm not sure that I quite believe in the Philosopher's Stone, but I do believe that alchemy did have certain uses and properties which we haven't quite discovered yet. And if you're interested in that sort of thing, there is a guy who I need to try and get a hold of and get together with him. We spoke on the phone a couple of times, we emailed, but it's just his wife got sick, and I didn't get a chance to meet him, and then, you know, I was really busy. And he wrote a book about Atlantis, which is one of the very, very few of the many, many books that were written about Atlantis. I'm just trying to remember, trying to see if I can see it here or whether it's on the other side. It might be on the other side, and I can't remember the name. But basically this guy's book was, his theory is that Atlantis was just off the coast of Portugal, which is the only guy that makes any sense to me, because that's, you know, if you read Plato, which is where the story of Atlantis comes from, and I've read it, I've read those passages, and it's like, why is everybody saying it's Santorini? Why are they saying it's Bimini? It's quite clear where it's supposed to be. It's supposed to be off the coast of Portugal, essentially, you know, just near the Pillars of Hercules, which is the Straits of Gibraltar. And that's exactly where this guy reckons that it was. And I've been to the museum in the Algarve where he reckons that it was, and he even names a city that he reckons was possibly one of the outer laying parts of Atlantis. And I went there and I filmed it, and he's kind of got a point. There's a big circular sort of range of mountains around it. It's, let's just say it's pretty suggestive, at least, if nothing else. But the really interesting thing is that a big chunk of Portugal just went under the waves about 300 years ago or so, and nobody knows anything about it because it happened so quickly that essentially there was no survivors, and it was a huge chunk of land, and we're talking hundreds of kilometers, if not thousands of kilometers squared of part of Portugal just sunk below the waves. And another thing that he said is that a few surviving eyewitnesses of a giant tsunami said that when a tsunami happens, the water recedes first of all, and then it comes in with the big waves. And it receded so far that people could see like ruined buildings, apparently. Now this guy, unfortunately, like I said, his wife got ill and so on, but he was trying to raise funds to get a side radar sonar technology on a boat and go out there and map the floor of the Algarve. And it's a worthwhile sort of thing to do, but it costs, I think the minimum is somewhere in the region of 30,000-40,000 pounds just to hire one of these boats that has that equipment. And it sounds like a crazy scheme, but you never know. Crazy things have been done. So if you guys are interested and you can help me raise 40,000-50,000 bucks, I'll definitely go get him and try and do it with him. But for the meantime, let's just stick to the little stuff, and let's see if you can get me to the United States without Nameless Bear having to put his hands so deep in his pocket as he has done and he is doing. So, you know, be sure to share my stuff, share the GoFundMe page, tell your friends, try and make it. You know, I'm going to be in Indiana for 2 days on the 4th and the 5th. Everything is happening so quickly and there's so little time that it's sort of fly by your pants, and we'll try and do the best we can with what we got. But, you know, we're crusaders. We don't need to know the whole story before we start marching towards Jerusalem. So just think of this as a very tiny effort. Nameless Bear is doing awesome stuff. That man is definitely an immortal. He's done everything so quickly, and he is trying to create a community of hardcore Catholics near where he lives. So if you come out there, if you're interested in this stuff, you know, come up there, get the book Believe. The safest way if you're going to come for a book signing is get whatever books you want signed from me before you arrive, so that you've got them with you. I think the bookshop will probably buy some, but it's not a guarantee, and it's not a guarantee that they will have enough for everybody. So you're just better off getting it off Amazon if you want to be sure, and I'll sign it, you know, when we're there. The book Believe, of course, is about the Christianity and so on. The Face on Mars has got a lot of this type of stuff about the ancient rages. It doesn't have the ancient rages specifically, but it's got a lot of interesting details about the pyramid, a lot more than I put in the video, and many other things. So that's a good generic reference book. If you want my fiction books about, you know, overlords of Mars, they are more sort of like, there is fiction, but there's a lot of science in there, and there's a lot of science, and since I've written them, a lot of the stuff that I sort of extrapolated is turning out to be not as fantastic as even I originally thought. So interesting days. Okay, I'm gonna keep this one relatively short and sweet, so if you've got comments, questions, whatever, just ping it below, and I'll like I said, I'm gonna put the GoFundMe link, and then below that I'm gonna put the link to the old blog post, which has got a lot more details and links to even more details. I haven't checked out whether the links are still valid and everything, so if some of you guys want to archive it, you know, please go ahead. All right, have a good night.